This is wrestling's greatest moments.
Hey now, wrestling fans, it's time for another episode of Wrestling's Greatest Moments. There are many reasons Madison Square Garden has earned the nickname the Mecca of Professional Wrestling, including the many great moments that took place there. Sit back as Wrestling's Greatest Moments looks at Madison Square Garden Magic, Brawn vs. Brawn, Heenan vs. Hogan. We'll take a look at Hogan's long history with Bobby Heenan before the WWF. We'll also reveal the superstar who was supposed to be the first member of the Heenan family and what happened. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. On September 22nd, 1984, wrestling fans were in for a big surprise, but not as much as WWF champion Hulk Hogan. The Hulkster was scheduled to defend his title against Jesse the Body Ventura, a former nemesis from the American Wrestling Association, who was making life difficult for Hogan as he challenged a Hulkster for the title. Little did Hogan know, but he was about to meet an even greater foe from the AWA that night. The Body's body breaks down. That night, fans were informed that Jesse Ventura would be unable to make the match due to being hospitalized. As a result, Big John Studd would take the Body's place. Was this some sort of angle to position Studd into a title match? Turns out it was something far worse. In his memoir, I Ain't Got Time to Bleed, Ventura recalls how he would wake up soaked in sweat and how he was beset with crippling pain in his lungs. Ventura went to the doctor and was placed in the intensive care unit after a diagnosis that his lungs were filled with blood clots. At first, things looked bleak, but Ventura pulled through thanks to being treated with heparin, which dissolved the clots. However, Ventura would have to take the blood thinner Coumadin for 60 days, which meant he couldn't wrestle. An in-ring injury such as a bruise or a cut could turn deadly, as the blood thinners could make him bleed out. While Jesse's health had been stabilized, he took a tremendous financial hit. The Body had already had a taste of what a program against Hogan would be like. I was supposed to have started wrestling by then. We had already sold out at the Los Angeles Sports Arena. I would have made a huge amount of money. Jesse believes he lost out on 7 figures worth of income due to the timing of his injury. I never got my matches with Hogan. I guess I must have lost about $1 million on that deal. It was a chance of a lifetime gone. I was stuck at home recuperating, face to face with the fact that even if I was able to get back into the ring after this, there would eventually come a day when I couldn't wrestle anymore. Although there's no mention of Ventura wrestling Hogan at the Los Angeles Sports Arena in 1984, the two did throw down a few times before their big match at the Garden was scheduled, and it's likely Jesse missed out on some big bucks. While he occasionally wrestled after he recovered from his illness, his in-ring career was all but over by 1986 as he successfully jumped to become the WWF's resident heel color commentator. Enter a giant-like opponent. With Ventura sidelined, the WWF brought in Big John Studd. Wrestling lore has it that Ventura was going to be Bobby the Brain Heenan's first client. Instead, Studd took the role. Studd, aka John Minton, was a veteran grappler who was billed at standing 6 feet 10 inches tall. While this was a typical piece of wrestling hyperbole, it helped him make his case for being the real giant of professional wrestling. Naturally, this didn't go over well with André the Giant fans, or the 8th wonder of the world for that matter, who was protective of his spot as wrestling's big man supreme. However, the real-life Studd-André rivalry is a story for another day. Hogan agreed to wrestle Studd, but he was unprepared for the man escorting Studd to the ring, Bobby the Brain Heenan. Studd was a formidable opponent, but with a Brain standing in his corner, things could get dicey, as Heenan was known not only for providing great advice to his wrestlers, but also for aiding them should the right opportunity arise. That opening usually involving the passing of a foreign object or tripping up an opponent when the referee was indisposed. Heenan was no stranger to Hogan. The two had first clashed in the AWA after the Hulkster turned babyface. Heenan knew Hogan was no normal opponent. He also knew Hogan presented a considerable challenge to his client, AWA World Heavyweight Champion Nick Bockwinkel. Heenan sent wrestlers from his faction, the Heenan family, to take Hogan out, but Hogan fought them off. Once Hogan got Bockwinkel into the ring, it seemed to be game over for the champion. The Hulkster scored several apparent wins over Bockwinkel, only for the champion to somehow escape with the title due to technicalities. Behind the scenes, AWA promoter Vern Gagne's reluctance to put the AWA World title on Hogan eventually convinced Hogan to head to the WWF. Like any wise man, the Brain would make sure that his wrestler didn't miss out on a world title due to a technicality. This mindset would play out later during Hogan and Studd's September 22nd showdown. The match in the Garden was an all-out brawl. Hogan was no shrimp, but Studd stood taller. Hogan had battled big men before, the biggest being André the Giant. See our André vs. Hogan, the early years video for more details. The only question was which man possessed the strength advantage. It was difficult to tell during the match, as both grapplers slugged it out. Interestingly, announcers Gorilla Monsoon and Mean Gene Okerlund spent much of the match discussing Heenan's arrival in the WWF and why he was there. Okerlund, who had worked in the AWA before jumping to the WWF, shared his knowledge of Heenan's cunning and willingness to cut corners. Monsoon did what he did best, talking up the WWF as the place to be in wrestling. Monsoon said if Heenan was assembling a collection of wrestling's best, it was clear he knew the place to do so was in the WWF. Back in the ring, Studd relied on his size and power to keep Hogan off balance. Things came to a head when Studd busted Hogan open, and the champion saw red. Hogan followed Studd out of the ring where they brawled. The champion tried to body slam Studd, but the big man was able to position himself where Hogan couldn't utilize his full power. Studd rammed Hogan's head into the mat apron, and it looked like both men would be counted out. Studd attempted to return to the ring and likely wouldn't have made it save for a last-minute assist from Heenan. Hogan had been counted out. Studd and Heenan grabbed the title and made a hasty retreat. The announce team reminded fans that a title cannot change hands on a countout. Naturally, Hogan was incensed and demanded his title back. Monsoon and Okerlund told fans that eventually the heels would be forced to return the title. However, Heenan's Grand Theft title enraged Hogan enough to make the Hulkster make a major mistake. Heenan goaded Hogan into assigning a return match that Studd could win the WWF Championship if Hogan was counted out. A serious stipulation. On October 22nd, Hogan and Studd met at Madison Square Garden for their rematch. The match's stipulation was no joke. Heenan had seemingly outsmarted Hogan, and Studd had shown he was capable of beating the Hulkster, even if it was only by countout. Heenan's strategy for Studd was obvious: batter the champion and attempt to win by countout. While Hogan likely suspected this, he soon found himself trapped in the very situation Studd had hoped for. On at least 2 occasions, the action spilled out of the ring, with Studd doing everything in his power to get Hogan counted out. The Hulkster's legendary resilience saved him when Studd rammed his head into the steel ring post, a move that likely would have ended the match for any other opponent save perhaps André the Giant. Later, Studd body slammed Hogan on the unforgiving floor. Keep in mind, this was before the WWF installed protective mats outside the ring. Somehow, Hogan made it back at the 9 count. Studd's strategy had failed, so he opted to defeat Hogan simply by wearing him down. Unfortunately for Studd, Hogan hulked up, defying Studd's repeated blows and firing off a volley of punches of his own. The Hulkster hit the Axe Bomber move that had won him so many matches in Japan. He followed up with a falling elbow, covering Studd for 2. Studd, to his credit, wasn't through and whipped Hogan into the ropes, going to clothesline the champion. Instead, Hogan ducked and bounced off the ropes, delivering a clothesline of his own. Hogan covered Studd, getting the 3 count and saving his title. Although Studd nearly kicked out, it was clear Hogan had won. Now, it was time for Hogan to collect the $15,000 being offered to anyone who slammed Studd. On this night, Studd and Heenan decided to skip the challenge, bailing out of the ring to fight another day. Bobby Heenan had made a strong impression with his Madison Square Garden debut. However, the subsequent encounter proved Hulk Hogan still had the brains number. This wouldn't stop Heenan from doing everything in his power to make life miserable for Hogan, with the ultimate goal being to have one of his wrestlers wrest the title from him. Over the next few months, Heenan would assemble a new faction of wrestlers. The WWF version of the Heenan family would go through several lineup changes, but one theme persisted: Heenan's mission to end Hulkamania at any cost. Did you get to see the Hulkster's Madison Square Garden battles against Big John Studd? Share your thoughts in the comment section and let us know if there's any videos you'd like wrestling's greatest moments to cover. In the meantime, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and spread the good news about wrestling's greatest moments, the channel that celebrates the squared circle.